morning, friends. It's great to see all of you, and for those of you who might be visiting us here, my name is Father Chris Stanish. I'm the Vicar General for the diocese, along with Father Jim Wozniak, the pastor here. We just want to offer a very warm welcome and let you know what a great joy it is to have you here. So when I was in college, I had an opportunity to study abroad in Mexico, and one of the exercises that we used to do in class is that we would translate newspaper articles. Now, I don't know if the teacher just found these stories and thought that it would be good for us to translate, or whether these were actually true stories. But one of the ones that I remember very distinctly is about this wealthy couple who were building an estate for themselves miles outside of the city. And so what they did was they hired a security company in order to guard the project, in order to prevent anybody from stealing the valuable materials. And so they had a security guard at the gate, and one of the things that the story talked about was how every day there was this worker who would take all the garbage and the other materials that were no longer being able to be used and would basically take it out to the trash. And this happened day after day after day, and the guard started to get a little suspicious. So he stopped the guy and he'd search the wheelbarrow, and it would be filled with all these materials, but he could never find anything that would confirm his suspicions that something was awry. So they finished the project, and about a year later, this security guard is at a bar and he sees this worker. So he goes up to him and he says, "Hey, I know that the project's done and everything is what it is, but I know you were up to something. What was it?" And so this worker, he takes a sip of his beer and he kind of looks up and grins and he says, "I was stealing wheelbarrows." My friends, it should have been so obvious, right? But the problem is that the guard was so concerned about looking for this through this junk and this garbage that he missed exactly what was right in front of him. And the funny thing is that you and I actually do the same thing when we're searching for happiness, right? When we're searching for happiness in our lives, we look in all the wrong places. We look through all the junk and the garbage of the world, and we fail to see that it's right in front of us, right? That we have a God who continues to provide us, who makes promises to us that we can experience lasting happiness. And yet so often we fail to see it, right? And this is what our readings are about today. And while I would love to go through all of them, I really want to draw our attention to the first reading from Jeremiah. Right? This setting takes place about 600 years before Jesus is even born. But we have Jeremiah, and he is the prophet of the Lord, and he's been the prophet for about 5 kings in Israel. And what's interesting is that over and over again, he's trying to get the people to understand that they can trust the Lord, that they need to be faithful to the Lord, right? That they need to live in that accordance. But Jeremiah is often called the weeping prophet because time and time again, these people continued to search for happiness in all the wrong places, right? They were immoral behaviors. They were worshiping false gods. I mean, they were doing all kinds of things that was causing them to move farther and farther away from the Lord. And this is why Jeremiah gives us this imagery in today's reading where he says, look, those who are seeking happiness, they are like a well-watered tree beside a stream. But those who seek their own source are like a barren bush in the desert, right? That doesn't experience the seasons. And so we kind of get this contrast between the barren bush and the well-watered tree. And the barren bush basically it's those who think that they have their own security. They trust in their own strength. They rely on their own things, right? They're not seeking the Lord's guidance. What we hear in this teaching is that if we choose God as our hope, if we trust in him and in his promises, if we place our security in God, that's where we're going to find lasting and true happiness, right? Because if we're seeking happiness in all the wrong places, then what we're going to end up finding is nothing but misery. Right? We're going to feel empty. We're going to feel like we're walking around like somebody who's barren and not fruitful. Right? And my friends, true happiness is a matter of being aware of who we are as well as whose we are. Right? And the reality is that happiness has very little to do with our external circumstances. I mean, when I was doing campus ministry for 6 years, I'd go on mission trips with the college students, and we would work with some of the poorest of the poor around the world. But the one thing that I always saw, no matter where we were at, is that they were always so happy, right? They had miserable circumstances, and yet they were joyful. They were laughing, they were smiling, right? And there's something about it that we look around the United States and how miserable people can be, because they're seeking it in the external circumstances. But true happiness is a matter of how we view the world around us, right? Do we have a mentality of scarcity where no matter what we have, it's never enough and it's never going to be enough? Or do we have a mentality of abundance, that whether we have a lot or a little, it's always enough, right? That we realize that we have a God who provides for what we need, not just what we want, for what we need and when we need it. I mean, I don't know about you, but oftentimes in my prayer in the morning, I'm like, all right, Lord, here's the list of things I want you to do. But it doesn't work that way, right? God's plans are always going to be greater than anything that we can come up with ourselves. And he makes us this promise that we will be able to experience life eternal, this lasting happiness. But that's the funny thing about a promise. A promise is not guaranteed based on how big or how small it is. No, we trust in promises based on the person who gives the promise. And God is making this promise. And God is our Heavenly Father who has the world in his hands, right? And so he is somebody that we can trust. And that's the fact of the matter, is that you and I don't need to be anxious. We don't need to be worried. We don't need to be fearful. Why? Because God is not anxious. God is not worried. God is not fearful. If we can place our trust in God, if we can hope in him, then we will be like that well-watered tree besides the stream, right? It'll help us then to live a life that is fruitful. So the spiritual challenge that I want to pose to you this week is that in your prayer, I want you to reflect on which ways are you seeking the garbage and the junk for happiness in this world, and really ask God for the grace to trust him and to trust in his promises.